What up, peeps? 2021 and newer Fox Float X2 Home Mechanic Teardown. Now please use this video as a reference to the official Fox instructions linked in the description. So what we're gonna do is remove the air slowly from the shock, slowly, or it'll make this boom noise and you may die. First step is to take a little screwdriver and get it under that ring and pop that ring out. Depending on how old the shock is, this can be a little bit difficult. Now slide that foreskin down and pop the tokens off. So you're gonna need to spend some money on specialty tools to take this shock apart, and I have them in the description, every single specialty tool, and you should have the basic ones if you're even thinking about doing this. Assuming you're a cheap bastard like myself, you're gonna end up with these Amazon shaft clamps. They basically hug the shock so it can't spin, so you can loosen everything. So this step, we're gonna go in the middle of the shock and then put it in the vise. Now there's a bit of a learning curve when carrying the shock in the shaft clamp, so make sure there's something soft underneath the vise so you don't drop the whole assembly. So you're gonna need at least a 4-inch vise on the table to put the shaft clamps in, and make sure that vise is very secure because you have to crank it all the way tight because you gotta put a lot of force on it. The specialty pin spanner inside of the Amazon kit, it's gonna hug around the stanchion, and be careful not to scratch the stanchion. It only goes in one way and it's like a normal screw counterclockwise. When you're using this pin spanner, it's super important to put downward pressure down so it does not slip. Slide that little collar all the way to the top. Take the shock and put it upside down in the same shaft clamps you had it in before, and put it back in the vise. So before you wrench on it, make sure you tighten the vise down. And hopefully you put your vise closer to the edge because mine's kind of in a nightmare position. After the vise is completely secure, take the lower eyelet and use a crescent wrench or whatever you have and loosen the lower eyelet counterclockwise. Slide the inner air can all the way up towards the top of the shock to expose the chrome damper shaft as much as you can. So you have to clean the chrome damper shaft before you clamp onto it with the shaft clamps because it's a very small shaft. You have to clean it. Trust me, I didn't clean anything else but this one. Now clamping onto the chrome damper shaft is the most difficult clamping and loosening of this job, so make sure it's super clean and the vise is very tight. So we're going to use the tiny little shaft clamps that it comes with. Make sure you maintain tight pressure within the shaft clamps when you're carrying it because it could be very easy to drop the whole assembly, and like I said, make sure there's a pad underneath the vise. With the vise as tight as it can humanly go, you're going to go on that lower eyelet again and loosen it off. Your shock may not have these travel reducers, that orange thing, but your shock will have two 2mm bolts. Take those out. So you're gonna need a Schrader valve tool, and it's on the piggyback. There's a little dust cover and you're gonna unscrew that first, and then you're going to undo the Schrader valve underneath it to release the pressure inside of the piggyback. So super important here, remember there's 100 psi of pressure inside of the piggyback, so you have to release the pressure. You could get hurt here if you forgot to do that. Push the IFP all the way down, and then you're going to need to play chopsticks. I used a flat bladed screwdriver and a pick. Fox does not like to use snap rings because they like to make your life difficult. Basically, this can be very hard or very easy. Just use two little things like chopsticks. This doodah, the silver thing, is called the bearing, but it's basically an oil seal. Take the 4-pin spanner you had to buy and basically take a crescent wrench and loosen it like a nut. So at this point, take some long nose needle nose pliers and pull that orange IFP out of the piggyback shock, and you're ready to drain this shock. Special note here, if your shock was cavitated, it's important to open the bleed port because it's going to be pressurized in there. So super important to put everything in order because you never know when a tree's going to come crashing through the roof and you're basically going to lose the spot where you are. Normally this is the painstakingly excruciating part of replacing all the O-rings, but I watched a couple Fox videos and those guys don't even replace every seal on every service. So this is the home mechanic version, just clean everything off super good. Now don't let those fools intimidate you. Bleeding the X2 is not super hard at home. Basically, it's like wiping your ass. As long as you get the bubbles out, that's all that matters. So fill the shock up, but not completely full because we gotta move the oil from the piggyback to the main reservoir. So there's no right and wrong way home bleeding this, but I found the 6mm high-speed compression knob had quite a few bubbles, so spend some time turning that knob. This is from the older Fox Float X2 service video. Put a glove around the stanchion, zip tie it on, and basically push into the glove to make some forward pressure to push the oil into the piggyback. I found moving the 6mm high-speed compression knob was getting air out of it. So I removed the seal, the bolt, the bleed hole from the IFP. I'm not sure if you're supposed to do this, but I did it. So basically take the orange IFP and roll it into the oil to hopefully not trap bubbles underneath it. So you need to just understand the concept of bleeding something, and you need to move very slow because you can introduce bubbles. Once I pushed the IFP in, it basically jizzed on me. I'm not sure if you're supposed to remove that bolt, but I did. Tighten that bolt up with a 2mm and use your long nose needle nose pliers to hold the IFP to fully tighten it down. So this is another technique from the Fox Tech YouTube video you should watch. He basically takes the main piston and rolls it into the oil so less air gets trapped within the main piston. Tighten down that main bearing cap, or basically the oil seal that screws into the stanchion, and tighten it to good and tight. This is my homemade bleed kit. It's a part Shimano brake bleed kit, but there was no bypassing that $40 tip from Fox. Basically, go to the hardware store, get a bunch of hoses, and try to cobble something together so you can push oil up and down. And make sure your cobbled together tool is completely sealed with air before you start. Fill it up with some of that 4-weight oil and plug it into the shock. Temporarily install the lower eyelet because we're going to use it as leverage to pull the shock up and down. So with the bleed tool connected up top, you're basically pushing oil into your bleed tool. Then take your bleed tool and push it down. But let me tell you, all the oil is going to go into the piggyback, so you need to put your hand on the IFP because it's basically not locked in place at this point. With the IFP about to fall on the floor, you're going to push it back in with your finger all the way to the top. Then you're going to take your tool and you're going to push the oil back down, and the IFP is going to slide to the bottom. Most of the air is going to be in the IFP, so focus here and do this about 10 times. Now you have to remember this is a home bleed kit, so you're going to have some bubbles coming up. Just make sure they're not large or consistent. So basically you're going to work the IFP up and down with your bleed tool and your finger, and when you remove the tool, make sure you fill up the bleed port with oil so it's overflowing when you put the bolt back in. Take a dial caliper, basically measure 1.14. Stick the tool, the protruded end, inside of the IFP or the piggyback, and then use your finger to push the IFP up until your tool bottoms out. This was super easy. Don't spend $60 on the special tool. Now the IFP is set, we're going to use the IFP air cap. Basically slide it midway down because there's a retaining clip that holds it in place. Remember that chopstick job in the beginning? Once that's in, we're going to put the Schrader valves back in and this adapter. Pump the shock up to 100 PSI, but the guys on my comments say to use 150 because it's less likely to cavitate. That's completely up to you. Now take the shock next to your head and basically listen if there's any air in it, and there won't be because this shock's not super hard to bleed. Now the oiling system is complete. You can rewind the video to watch how to put the air cam back together, but super important here, make sure this dumb little clip on the outside of the shock is fully seated because I can't tell you how many times and how hard it is to put back together. You have to click the video on the screen because setting this shock up on the trail is just as difficult as servicing it, but you will be rewarded by watching this video.